Howdy. Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Thanks for joining us as we study the book of Philippians. For more information on Breakaway, visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk and stick around for more at the end.
Tonight's scripture is Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hungry, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
Well, we're continuing on in our study of Philippians, and it's interesting because we're in the passage where Paul says, I've learned the secret for how to be content in any situation. I've learned how to be okay when not everything's okay. And it's interesting that we're studying that now because last week I was looking over it, then flew to Missouri, was teaching in Missouri all last week. And while I was there, was experiencing some kind of weird pain in my arm that then began to affect my neck. And by Friday, I was having trouble using my right arm. I had lost some of the strength in it that I was accustomed to. We have wonderful doctors here in town that got me in yesterday, so I was, rather than preparing some of the things I was planning on doing for the sermon, I was in an MRI machine yesterday and found out that I have damaged a disc in my neck, which is pressing on a nerve that's sending pain down my right hand and kind of numbing it and making it not as useful as one would hope a hand would be. And so I got the news last night that I'll be visiting a neurosurgeon and trying to figure out what the plans are from there. What was interesting about that for me is a couple years ago, most of you probably weren't here, a few years ago for me at Breakaway when I had issues with my lower back. I had herniated 3 discs in my lower back, and we went on a fun ride at Breakaway of Ben rapid weight fluctuations and different drug diagnoses. Had some really interesting sermons back then. Should have been there. And trying to get to the place where I could, at one point, walk again. It was a little scary. And God had really delivered us from some difficulties with my lower back that I was so happy to be out of. In fact, it had become a normal prayer of mine of, God, thank you that all those days are behind me. And so it was interesting last night, being on the medication they have me on. I'm only sleeping maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, so if I say something too insane, I apologize. But I'm up at 2 a.m. last night because I can't sleep. It hurts to lay down. And I'm just sitting on the couch, just trying to not move my head, just feeling my arm tingle and realizing it'll probably be okay. Like, this isn't as serious as what happened before. I think there's some ways to deal with this that'll probably be fine. This probably isn't something to worry about, but all that's still up in the air. And the reality is it's still 2 a.m. and I can't sleep. And I was so glad to be through all that in the past. And yet now here we are I've got a couple doctor's meetings, maybe some therapy sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And I start sitting there, and at 2 a.m. I'm on my couch going, okay, can't sleep because of the pain, because of the drugs, don't want to watch TV, can't hold up a book. So what should we do, God? And I thought, well, maybe we'll think about the sermon for tomorrow. I've learned in whatever situation I'm in to be content. Okay. I didn't think you were going to make me live into that one this much, but let's live into it. God, how does this work in a situation like that? How can I be okay when things aren't okay? That's the question. And you go, well, why unpack all that for us? Because I just don't think I'm the only person who's ever been there. Maybe not many of you are having spine issues in your 20s, but I would guess a lot of you have been in that place where you look around and you go, you know what? Things aren't okay. Not everything is how I would hoped it would be. There's some situations in my life I want to be different. And how do I handle that? How do I deal with that? What's a healthy way to navigate some messier, tricky things that are happening relationally here? Or some stresses that are just going to stay stressful until this semester's over. Or some difficulties that are going to be waiting for me at home that probably aren't going to get all tied up neat with a bow by the time I come back up here for the spring semester. How do I handle some of these situations? How do I deal with the difficulties in life? How do I be okay when things aren't okay? We need to figure out how to deal with that. And here's the situation. What I've discovered in studying recently is we're not great at that. Paul's talking about contentment tonight, and we have a difficult time with that. It's interesting. Time Magazine, Huffington Post, The Economist, all these different magazines last year reported studies from the American Psychological Association. They did a massive study called Stress in America. And in this massive study, Stress in America, they found the most stressed demographic in this country is you. They said the millennials, which is basically people from around age 18 to like mid-30s, basically this room. They said, when we studied stress in America, you're the most stressed people in America. Congratulations on that dubious honor. And they said, here's the weird thing about it, is they said, you swept every category. Every question about stress. On a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed are you? You whipped everybody. On, are you more stressed this year than last year? You beat them. On, has stress deprived you of sleep this month? It deprived you of more sleep than anybody else. You just crushed them all in the stress category. 20-year-olds are more stressed than everybody else in America. That's what it says, right? And what's interesting was they said, we're not sure why you guys are so twisted up about it all. They said, we would guess it's the uncertainty of the job market and rising debt of school, those sorts of things. So where am I going to work? How am I going to get money? And they said, that's our guess. The weird thing is that when we see 20-year-olds get jobs and get money, the stress level stays the same. So it's funny, in this report, they're saying, we think it's financial, even though the data tells us they're still stressed, even though they get their finances straight. And they said, but what we have realized is, it keys in with another test that The Economist put out recently, that they said, when their circumstances do change in their 20s, the stress doesn't go away until, for some reason in your 20s, something starts they call the U-curve. And the U-curve is something they've seen where your happiness index begins to drop. They said 20-year-olds start being stressed less, but what takes its place is a general unhappiness that has a downward trend until about your mid-40s, and then picks up to about your 20-year-old levels when you're in your 60s. And so it was interesting to read that, and you're like, oh, that's comforting. So I'll tell the 20-year-olds, hey, the stress goes away when that wave of crushing sadness comes in. So don't you worry about a thing, right? And maybe in your 60s, the sun will come out, right? That's kind of what they're saying. And as you read this study, it was like, it's interesting. So you'll be sad till about your 60s. And they're like, we were trying to figure out why. And they said, so we started controlling the data for all this stuff. They're like, maybe it's that old people are just tougher than younger people. And they're like, no. They're like, maybe the people with more money are happier than people with less money. No. Maybe people who raise teenagers are stressed, so it skews the data. When you get the teenagers out of the house, they get happier again. That's why they're happy in their 60s. So they changed all this data variables of where you live, how much money you make, whether you have kids or not, whatever. And they said, let's take all these circumstantial variables out and see if the same trend is there. And you know what? It is. All over the U.S., and all over the world, people still, even when you give them money or take away money, give them kids, take away kids, they tend to be stressed and then unhappy, right? Everywhere you go, even New Zealand. You know, I thought they're always happy there. Even Lord, when she sounds depressed, is still singing about all the friends she has. You can't escape it. And as they're doing these tests, it's interesting. They're like, you know what? There's a general discontent in the world. And no matter how you tweak the circumstances, it doesn't tend to take the trend away. Contentment, satisfaction, joy tends to not be directly related to changing circumstances. And I tell you that because some of you are going, as soon as the semester's done, I'll be happy. As soon as college is done, we'll be happy. As soon as I get a job, I'll be happy. As soon as I meet the one, I'll be happy. As soon as we bear many children, we'll be happy. And on it goes. And you go, I'm sorry, the data doesn't show that necessarily, right? As soon as you get people food and shelter, if you add a bunch of money, add different stuff, it doesn't tend to change their circumstance. Actually, even some studies show that the more money you come across, the more problems you see. So if you're just sitting here thinking, hey, I think money will solve it, it won't. And so what's interesting is all around this data, the world is figuring out people around the world are generally unhappy. And a change in circumstance doesn't predict a rise in contentment. Contentment must come from some other place. If it doesn't come from the situation, how can we bring it into our situation? Into your difficult relationships, into your stressful school schedule, into the weird mixture of all the stresses and strains that come. How can we be a content and happy people? It seems to be a hard thing to find. And yet here in this passage, Paul is talking, and Paul says, I learned the secret. He says, I know what it is. And he backs it up by the fact that he's writing this letter in prison, and one of the most often repeated words is joy. You see a bubbly, happy man in prison. And if you've been reading through Philippians with us, you go, why is he so upbeat? And he's going to tell us in this text, because I learned the secret of how to be content in any situation. It's a secret the world desperately needs, and I'm going to tell you tonight. And as you look at this passage to set up the context of it, the letter to the Philippians is a thank you note. Paul is their mentor, and Paul had told them about Jesus, and then he had gone to other cities to tell other people about Jesus, the Son of God, and the Philippians were so thankful for Paul's ministry, they would send him money as he would go out and tell other people about Jesus. And so Paul's writing this letter we've been studying is to the Philippians, and it's thank you for sending me money. And he says in this section, we read it, he says, I rejoiced greatly when I got the stuff you sent. But then as their mentor, he wants to give them perspective. He says, I rejoiced greatly when I got your stuff. But then he says, but not that I'm speaking of being in need. He says, I want to make sure something's clear to you, young people. He said, it wasn't that I was poor and sad, and then you sent me money, and I got happy. He said, I don't want you to think that's what happened. He said, I don't want you to think the reservoir of joy in my heart rises and falls based on how much money's in my bank account. The accumulation of things isn't what affects my joy. And he tells them, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Now to me, that translation is always a little weird to me. I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Because what he's saying is not, I've learned that in every situation I'm supposed to be content. What he's saying is, I've learned how to be content, no matter what situation. He says, so thank you for sending me money. That was so awesome. But I want you to know, whether I had money or not, I'm still happy. I didn't need it. He says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. He says, I figured it out. I know how to do it. I know how to be abound, and I know how to be brought low. And what's interesting about Paul is, he's not just saying hypothetically, I think I know. Paul experienced that. Paul grew up with money. Paul grew up with some of the best education money could buy. He grew up with prestige. And then when he came to Christ, he lost all that. And as he preached the gospel, he got beat up, imprisoned, mocked, stripped, was homeless at times. So he knew what it was to be high, and he knew what it was to be low. And he says, I figured out how to navigate both of those things, and we need that tonight. Some of us don't know how to be brought low. That you're used to certain circumstances working a certain way. And if something kicks the legs out from you of a crutch you were depending on, you're not sure what to do. Some of you, when someone breaks up with you, you are lost. Or if you have some financial difficulties, you don't know what to do. Or you've always assumed you'd be great at school, and then when you're struggling in a class, you've completely felt like the world's gravitational pull has shifted, right? You don't know how to be brought low. And Paul says, I know how. Some of you don't know how to abound. You don't know what to do when good things happen. If you became rich, you'd be an insufferable person. I've seen that happen. Some of you, if you get a leadership position, it'll make you insecure and weird. Some of you, if we suddenly gave you 1,000 followers on Facebook, you would become a shallow, insecure, just kind of stressed person. Some of us don't know how to be brought high. Some of us don't know how to be brought low. Paul says, I figured out how to do both. In whatever situation I am, I've learned to be content. That word content, it's literally the combination of the words self and sufficient. He said, I'm satisfied. I know how to be okay with just me, right? This was the highest goal of the Buddhist. It was what the Stoics praised above all virtues, to be content in whatever circumstance. And Paul says, oh, that? Yeah, I have that. Isn't that amazing? He says, I have that. And not only does he say, I have that, he says, you're supposed to have that. The Christian is meant to live with that kind of contentment. 1 Timothy 6:8 says, with food and clothing, with this let us be content. Hebrews 13:5 says, let your conversation be without covetousness, be content with the things you have. In 1 Timothy 6:6, Paul said, godliness with contentment is great gain. We are supposed to be content. The Christian is supposed to be satisfied, is supposed to be even when the world is high and low. Right? How do you get it? Paul says it's learned. It's not something you're born with. It's not like, well, he's just an easygoing guy, and I'm not. He says, I learned contentment. That means it's learnable. You can learn it. And yet he says it's a secret. Not many people have it. He literally uses the word for being initiated. He said there's like a secret club called people who aren't freaked out about stuff. And he said, and I'm in it. I got in. So the questions we got to answer tonight and the rest of our time. What is this contentment he has? Where does it come from? And how do I get it? That's where we're going. What is this contentment? Jeremiah Burroughs is an old Puritan minister. He wrote a book called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. It's a beautiful book. I think you can download it free online. And he has a definition of Christian contentment he got from this text that's so good. He says, Christian contentment is a sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of the Spirit. Let me give you a simplified version for tonight. Christian contentment is an inward, peaceful disposition. He says it's inward, meaning that when I'm content, it's a peace that's on the inside. It's not dependent on circumstances. I don't need everything to be going okay for me to be okay. And what that means is, too, true Christian contentment is not just acting like everything's okay. To be truly peaceful and content as a Christian is not just to keep your mouth shut and not complain. It's interesting, Jeremiah Burroughs said it this way. He said, some people are so weak they cannot restrain the unrest of their spirits. But in words and behavior, they reveal what woeful disturbances there are within. Their spirits are like the raging sea, casting forth nothing but mire and dirt, and are troublesome not only to themselves, but also to all with whom they live. And you say, how does Jeremiah know my roommate? You see, he just knows people. He says some people, when things go wrong, they can't help but spew it forth. He says they're like a tide that's just spewing muck and mire to everyone with whom they live. And some of you know people like that. You don't even ask them anymore how you're doing. You just kind of try to avoid them. And they're like, I'm stressed today and lonely and tired and hate you, right? And you're just like, ah! You're a raging, frothing sea of unhappiness. But then he says others are able to restrain such disorders of the heart. But even so, they boil inwardly and eat away like a canker. These people, while they are as a serene calm on their tongues, have blustering storms upon their spirits. And while they keep silent, their hearts are troubled and even worn away with anguish and vexation. They have peace and quiet outwardly, but within, far from the unruly and turbulent workings of their heart. He says that's not true contentment. Contentment's not just acting like you're fine. Hey man, how are things going? Fine. No, I'm fine. Things are great. That's not Christian contentment. It's not lying to people. That when your heart is broken and it's hurting, telling everybody, oh, I'm fantastic, day's great, hallelujah, God is good all the time. He says that's not it. True contentment is not saying it. It's really feeling it. It's an inward calm. It's an inward peace. That's the second piece. It's an inward peace. And for sake of clarity, let me tell you what that peace is not. It doesn't mean that you're ignorant of afflictions. Some people think that true Christian contentment, that peace in the midst of difficulty, means trying to diminish difficulties. Like saying, oh, it's not that big a deal. Oh, my parents divorced, not that big a deal. Oh, me failing, it's no big deal. It doesn't matter. The Bible never tells you to do that in the name of peace. It doesn't say to not call crosses crosses. You can call something difficult, difficult. Inward peace does not require ignorance, right? You can be fully briefed on a situation and not be in total denial and still be calm. That's what this is going for. I have eyes wide open of the difficulty in front of me. I'm not in denial, and I can still have peace. That's what he's commending, right? To have contentment, inward peace, doesn't mean you don't voice your struggles to God or a friend. Some people will hear this, being content in all situations. You go, well, Ben, what if I need to vent it? Well, it doesn't mean you can't tell God your problems. Read the Psalms. It doesn't mean you can't confess your problems to a friend. It will impact how you do it. But contentment doesn't mean you don't talk about your issues. It also doesn't mean you don't seek help or relief from difficult circumstances. To be content in a situation doesn't mean that you're fine with it going on. You can be in a situation and say, God, I want you to take this away. I want you to heal this relationship. I want you to take this illness away. I want this problem to diminish. I want this person to be healed. You can say that and yet still be content in a situation. So you go, okay, then what is peace? If it's an inward peace, what is that peace? It means I don't complain. It means I don't freak out. It means I don't punt Christian duty in the middle of frustration. It means that when life gets difficult, I don't suddenly punt God and any belief that he's around or cares about me. It's interesting. I think I told the story in here years ago. I had a friend relate it to me about a buddy of his that was in a plane. And he was in an airplane where they were flying, and I don't remember all the details. Something about there were some issues with the engine, some kind of power failure, but they are in flight, and suddenly it's flickering. Suddenly they're not hearing sounds they're supposed to, and suddenly they're feeling the plane lose lift dramatically. Masks coming down, all that stuff you ignore that they tell you in the beginning about how to prepare for a disaster is now upon you. And he said as the plane began to descend rapidly and unnaturally, his friend said there were two distinct reactions in the plane. And it was fascinating. All those people in the plane, hundreds of people, two reactions. One group of people, when the crisis hit, things are bad, they instantly began to pray. Oh, God, be with us. Oh, God, preserve. They just began to cry out to the Lord in that moment. The other half of the plane, he said about half, just screamed the F word. Just went, right, and just kind of, that's all they had. That when life goes bad, I'm just going to lose it. That's what I'm going to offer to the universe, right? And what's funny is, the plane recovered. And they had an interesting experience the rest of the plane ride as they rode together and just realized, I just learned something about you that probably your friends don't even know. And that is which you are, a prayer person or a cuss word person in the middle of crisis, right? Which are you? The truly content person, when a crisis hits, doesn't freak out. God is dead, you're a liar, you don't even care, and the world is over. All right, true contentment doesn't go bananas when life doesn't go your way. It doesn't just scream profanity into the dark, right? It does something proper and holy. It doesn't forget Christian duty. Nehemiah was told, hey, while we're building the wall, the city's under attack. Some people wanted to panic and run. Nehemiah said, no, we're not going to do that. And he prayed and made a plan, right? That's what good Christians do. We don't sink into discouragement. We don't give up in despair. We don't go to weird, broken, unhealthy places for relief, to get away from the pressure, go and dive into some addictions, to some unhealthy places, to the arms of someone whose arms we shouldn't be in. We don't rebel against God. We have an inward, peaceful disposition or frame of mind. And by disposition and frame of mind, I mean my heart is at peace and my head is at peace. My thoughts are thinking true thoughts about God and the world, and my heart is resting in Him. Right? That's the idea. Where does that come from? In the midst of difficulty, how can you be the person like so few in your dorm that when all is stressful, you have an inward, peaceful, sweet, quiet disposition? Where do you get that? Circumstances doesn't give it to you. Paul tells us in verse 13, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Where does the power to be content come from? Entirely from the agency of another. It comes from another. Now, I hate to burst some bubbles tonight, but some people, you know this verse, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And you go, yeah, that's the verse that's like, I can run a marathon because God will give me the power to run. Or I can get a degree because God will give me the power to get a degree. Or I can beat up a guy, right? You put it on the back of your shirt in MMA or something. You're like, I can beat you up because God gave me the power to punch you in the face. And they say, that's what this is. That's not entirely what Paul's saying. If you look at the circumstances, what he's talking about, he's talking about enduring and flourishing in difficult circumstances. I can be content. I can be calm even when the world is difficult. I can be okay even when it's not okay. Why? He literally says, because I'm strengthened by the strengthening one. Someone is coming and giving his strength to me. For the Christian, our sufficiency is not self-sufficiency. It's in radical dependency. That's how the Christian does it. How can you be calm when everyone else is shaking? Christian contentment is a peaceful, inward frame of mind that freely submits to and delights in union with the Almighty. How can I be peaceful? Because I'm tethered to the Almighty. And so I can freely and joyfully rest in my union with Him. It's interesting, you see it with little kids. Kids will grow up really anxious if they're not in a stable environment. If you have a little baby boy or a little baby girl and you raise them in an environment that's not stable, they will grow up to be anxious children and have a lot of social and probably addictive issues when they're older. And so it's important to put a kid in a stable environment, physically and emotionally. And you say, what's a stable environment for a kid? A stable environment for a kid is one where the person who has power over them, and it's real power to protect them and power to feed them. It's that there's someone who has power over them that cares about them. And if that kid can know there's someone that has power over me, that cares about me, that has my best interests in mind, that's going to be a stable kid. That's going to be an okay kid. You want them in a situation where they know that. That's where you get peaceful children. I've got someone who knows and cares for me, so I can function. I can be okay. And that's the Christian secret. It's not going to be a girlfriend. It's not going to be a boyfriend. It's not going to be money. All that can leave. It's not going to be your parents. They can leave. But the Christian can be content in any circumstance. Why? Because I know the one who has power cares about me. And so I can operate and I can be at peace even when the world is going crazy. So Sergeant Strucker, when he was in the battle in Mogadishu in 1993, he was sent with a small group of elite U.S. forces into Somalia. They went in to conduct a mission in Mogadishu that went bad. And he was in charge of leading the Humvee column that went into the city to pull men out after 2 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down in the middle of a city filled with terrorists. And in the midst of that situation, they got their first U.S. casualty, and it was in his Humvee. And he had to lead the column through a city filled with gunfire, all raining down on them. They barely made it out of the city alive. And when he got back to the base and they were unloading their men and just trying to think through the unthinkable that had just happened, the complete upturning of their mission, he was told by his commanding officers, you have to go back into that city. There are people left in there. You have to get in your Humvee and take it back in there. And then they told him, but you can't load men back in that car with the blood of their fallen friend in the back of that Humvee. Wash the blood out, then get in the car and drive it back into that city. And so he said he took the Humvee around the corner and he began to try to wash the blood out, and he panicked. He said in the midst of that panic, he just kept thinking, this is going to be my blood. This is going to be my blood. This is going to be my blood. And he said he just panicked. He just couldn't even imagine going back into that chaotic situation. And so he stopped. What do you do in that moment? He stopped and he prayed. And as he said, as he prayed, the sweet thought came over him. The God who rules over the universe knows me because Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came for me. And he adopted me and he made me his own. I belong to Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. So one of 2 things is going to happen today. I'm going to live and go home to be with my wife, or I'm going to die and go home to be with Jesus. But either way, no matter what happens, I go home. And he said as soon as he began to pray that, a peace crept into his soul. He jumped up, climbed in the car, drove it back into that city. I believe he said 4 more times to rescue men in harm's way. He could operate. He could function. Why? Because I'm tethered to the powerful one, and he knows my name. Christian contentment is a peaceful, inward disposition that submits to, rests in, union with the Almighty. Be still, my soul. The Lord is on your side. That's a hymn I pray a lot. So what's the secret? How do I get it? Let me say it this way. The most content person in the world is also the most discontent person in the world. And you say, Ben, what does that mean? To be the most content person in the world, the secret is to be the most discontent person in the world. You go, what? Paul was that way. If you gave Paul everything in the world, he would be unhappy. It's not enough. But if you take away everything, but give him God, he's at peace. He says, I am discontent with everything in the world. I must have God. But if you give me God, take away everything else, and I'll be fine. That's how the Christian can function. How can I be content when you take away my prizes, take away my possessions? How can I be content and not become a weirdo when you start giving me acclaim and giving me attention and giving me money? How can I be steady? Because those things aren't where I get my source. So I don't lose me when I lose them. I don't lose my head when I gain them. I can stay steady. Why? Because what thrills my soul is Him. And if you give me Him, I'm content. You give or take anything else, but I'm His. That's the Christian's secret. The godly heart doesn't just want the peace of God. It wants the God of peace. I want Him. I must enjoy the fountain of peace and not just the streams of peace. And if I have Him, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay, right? And so how do I get contentment like that? I pray for Him and ask it. Right? I pray for Him and I ask for it. I'm a dad to 2 little girls. And can I tell you something of my 2 little girls? I want them to ask me for things. I do. It thrills my soul when they do. I don't want them to whine about it. I don't want them to come up to me and go, Chip! I want a chip! I want a chip! I go, hey. No. You don't talk to Dad like that. And I don't say that because I'm insecure, like, don't talk to me like that. I'm your daddy, right? And I don't talk to that because I'm some tyrant, like, you show me respect, right? Emotionally, I'm fine either way. I don't want them to come to me like that because that's not good for them. It's not good to react to the world that way. I don't want them to freak out when they want something. I don't want them to be rude. I don't want them to lose perspective. You don't care if I starve. Really? Think about that for a second. Who's fed you your whole life? Right? So I don't want them to complain, and I don't want them to freak out. But I want them to come ask me. I want them to come up and go, Daddy, chip, please. Or for Sparrow, we taught her the sign language, please, where you pat your chest. And she's somehow moved it down to her belly, and she'll go, chip. And I'm like, I got you. I got you. And I love that. I want them to come to me with their needs. It's one of my favorite things in the day when they do. God's a good dad. He wants you to come and talk to Him about your needs. And then He wants you to trust Him. So for me, what did I do on the couch? I pray to Him and I preach to myself. So last night at 2 a.m., I'm sitting on that couch and I go, okay, God, let me pray to You. I don't want to be here. I want to be asleep. I don't want my neck to hurt. I don't want surgery. I don't want to take drugs. I don't want to go through months of this. I don't want to be complaining right now, and I know that I am. And I just poured out my heart to the Lord and tried to do it in a respectful and as honest a way as I could. And then I started preaching to myself. I started talking to myself. I thought about John Patton, that amazing missionary to the New Hebrides that had to bury his own wife and child with his own hands And he wrote this in his journal. Stunned by the dreadful loss in entering upon this field of labor to which the Lord had himself so evidently led me, my reason seemed for a time almost to give way. I felt her loss beyond all conception or description in that dark land. It was very difficult to be resigned, left alone, and in sorrowful circumstances. But feeling immovably assured that my God and Father was too wise and loving to err in anything he does or permits, I looked up to the Lord for help and struggled on in his work. I thought about that. I thought about what Jonathan Edwards wrote in his resolutions. Whenever I feel pain, to think about the pain of martyrdom and hell. I thought about that. Because I thought I can try to comfort myself with things I'm grateful for. And I used to do that. And that's not a bad thing to do. When I was feeling bad, I'd go, but God, thanks that I'm healthy. Thanks for my kids. Thanks for my wife. And I would list all the things I'm thankful for. And that's good. Last night, that wasn't enough. Because I was like, what if he takes all that? It'll all go away at some point. That's how marriage works. If you stay till the end, one of you will bury the other. So I go, there is going to come a day when that sort of thing happens. What do I tell myself then? I think about the fact that my God is a good dad, that he's loving, that he doesn't err, that martyrs have gone through much harder things than I am, and that hell is an experience I will know nothing about except what I read in a book by the grace of God. And then I began to read Philippians, and I said, how did Paul do it? And what Paul did is he said, he who began a good work in me will be faithful to complete it. God is doing something good in the world, and he's doing something good in me, and he'll finish it. Jesus Christ, though he was in the very form of God, did not consider that a thing to be seized for his own advantage, but he emptied himself and became nothing, became a servant for me, that I could know God. And so when I suffer, it's a gift from God. It's a sign that I'm really his, is what he said in Philippians 2, because I'm on the same path that Jesus was. And then in Philippians 3, he says, and my citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there who will transform this lowly body to look like his heavenly body. And so I poured out my soul, and then I prayed to the Almighty, the one who started a good work and will finish it, the one who loved me and came for me, the love who will come for me again and rescue this world and redeem this beat-up body. I fixed my eyes on him, and a couch of pain can become a place of worship. Contentment comes into the soul. Inward, peaceful disposition. Why? Because my sufficiency comes from dependency on the Almighty One who loves me.
Howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm here with Ben and Reed Arena, and we have had a great night. We hosted Robbie C. Band. I love them. Always do such a great job, and just so thankful for their leadership, and just a beautiful time of worship, and a message on contentment.
Yes.
Yeah, great timing right around Thanksgiving, right. Get you, tis the season. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, what's funny is I taught this text like 4 years ago at Breakaway. I think it's still on the podcast, like if you go to on iTunes. We just came through it again because we're in Philippians. I did it then because it was around Thanksgiving, and it was when Black Friday was this main thing, and I did this whole talk on contentment. So it was actually kind of interesting to try to come at it from a different angle tonight. And I think obviously God gave me one with trying to figure out what's going on with me, but yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, if you want more on the subject, I kind of did it from a bit of a different angle. I think back in like 2011 or something like that, was looking at it. But anyway, you can check that out. So I've done 2 sermons on it. I don't have a ton of other things to say, except I will say 2 things. The first is, I would say, one of the things that struck me that was so beautiful about Paul's statement is the perfect mix of confidence and humility that Christianity gives you. I mean, if you think about that statement, I can do all things. That's a very confident statement, looking into the face of your addictions. I can stop that. looking into the face of conversations, a tough conversation. I can confront that person. You know, I can endure that situation. I can handle that. I can exist in that moment. I can accomplish that goal. That's a really big thing. I can do anything. That's what he just said. I can do all things. That's a very confident statement to make, and the Christian should. Some people, I think, in the name of humility go, well, I don't know, I'll try to what. And you go, that's not Paul. That's not the Bible. But he says, I can do all things. You put me in any situation, I will endure because of he who strengthens me. And it's a extremely confident and humble statement, right? I can do all things because I live by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And so it makes you confident but not arrogant, humble but not wimpy. That's the gospel, right? And that's what's so cool about it, and what's so cool about that statement. And I don't think I have any more to say about it than that, other than I just think it's so awesome. But the only other verse that leapt out to me I didn't get to say was just Hebrews 13. You get a sense of that. He says, keep your life free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. And that's an interesting statement. Okay, we're having a conversation about money. He says, don't love money. Be content with what you have. And he could have said a lot of things about money and the dangers of being someone who loves money. But then he says, for he has said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. So we can say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And that's an interesting combination of ideas. Don't love money. Why? Because God's never going to leave you. And so you can say, he's my helper. And you go, what does that mean? And he's saying, people are going to go to money for security. They're going to go to money for a sense of safety. Mm-hmm. That's why you love money. And he says, don't do it. But fight the love of possessions, not by saying, I will not buy another whatever you buy to make yourself feel good. He says, you fight it by telling yourself, God's never going to leave me. God helps me. God loves me. And that's where your rest is found. And that's what Paul's doing here. I can be content anywhere because I'm not setting my hopes on things that are going to run away. You set your hopes on circumstances, they can leave you. You set them on the Lord, you're secure, you know. Yeah. And so then you're free to enjoy people and things. Maybe one other statement I'll make too is this is not a sermon advocating resignation. Like, oh, well, I can endure this relationship. I mean, some of you might be in some really unhealthy relationships that you need to get out of. You might be in relationships you need to break up, or you might be hanging with groups of people that you go, it is no longer healthy for you to be in that world. So by Paul saying, I can endure all situations, doesn't mean, and I should. Wisdom may mean you make some changes in your life. Right? Yeah. So this isn't a resignation to, oh, well, this is my lot. You may need to make some healthy changes in life. But what Paul is giving you here is sometimes you're going to be in situations that you can't avoid. You're going to land in prison and you don't get to control when you get out. You're going to land in an illness you don't have the control over you want to. And in those moments, you can be at peace because the one who does rule those moments loves you if you're in Christ. And that's the hope from today.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's powerful. Great perspective and great additions. So we've got next week off for Thanksgiving, and so if you're tracking with us, we will take a week off, but Breakaway will be back. We have 2 breakaways in December, and we're excited. We'll have one more talk finishing out the book of Philippians, and then our all-worship breakaway. So if you're able to join us, if you ever want to come out to a breakaway in person, this is a great time to do it. We're excited for what we have in the next couple weeks, and as always, we're just grateful that you're listening with us. So thanks so much, and take care.